The desperate gamble, the numbers on the page blurred into a gray, menacing fog. Elara Vance pressed the heels of her hands against her closed eyelids, trying to push back the headache blooming behind them. The small kitchen table was buried under an avalanche of paper each. One a demand for payment, a reminder of a life slipping through her fingers. The afternoon light, usually so warm in her cramped apartment, felt harsh and accusatory. 24 years old. An art degree that was useful for nothing but decorating the walls of the thrift store where she worked part-time, and a mountain of debt that grew taller and more ominous with every passing day. Her father's failing heart had become a black hole, sucking in every dollar, every hope, every shred of security they had ever scraped together. The latest hospital bill for a new medication his insurance refused to cover was more than she. Made in 4 months. A weak, rattling cough echoed from the bedroom down the short hall. The sound was a physical blow to Elara's chest, a constant, painful reminder of why she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. Her father had given her. Everything worked double shifts his whole life, his own hands rough and worn so hers could hold paintbrushes. Now, as he grew frailer, trapped in a body that was betraying him, she was powerless to give him the one thing he needed. A chance. Her phone vibrated against the formica. A jarring intrusion. Sasha's name flashed on the screen. Her best friend, who had traded their college dreams for a life of sleek apartments and expensive handbags. A world away from Elara's desperate reality. Eli. Honey, you there? Sasha's voice was a mix of concern and the distant clink of fine china. You haven't answered any of my texts. Have you eaten? Slept at all? I'm fine, Sasha, Elara lied, her voice raspy from unshed tears. Just paperwork. A pause on the other end, filled with the weight of things unsaid. When Sasha spoke again, her tone was lower, more careful. Listen, I know you're going to hate me for this. I know it's not. It's normal. But these aren't normal times. There's something. An opportunity. Elara's stomach clenched into a cold, hard knot. What kind of opportunity? An event? Very exclusive? Very private? Wealthy men, the kind who have more money than they know what to do with, they bid. On an evening of companionship, it's all very elegant, high class. No back alleys. The money? Eli, the money could wipe out those bills. It could cover your dad's new treatment. The room seemed to tilt. Lara gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. You mean an auction? For people? No, it's not like that, Sasha said quickly, though her voice lacked conviction. It's more like arranged dates for the elite. Some women just go to galas, dinners. The bidding, it gets high. Life-changing high. I can't, Elara whispered, the words choking her. Sasha, you know, I'm not. I know, Sasha cut in, her voice gentle but firm. And you don't have to do anything you don't want to. The money they pay ensures discretion and, strangely, respect. It's in everyone's interest to be gentlemen. It's your choice, always. But it's a way out, Eli. It's a lifeline. Da. The line went dead. Elara sat in the silence of her crumbling world, the words lifeline echoing in her mind. It was a point of no return. A line once crossed that could never be uncrossed. 3 days later, the decision was made for her. Her father had a spell, a dizzying collapse in the living room, that left him gasping and terrified on the floor. As she held him, feeling the frightening flutter of his heartbeat against her own frantic pulse, he'd looked up at her with watery, ashamed eyes. I'm so sorry, my sweet girl, such a burden. Those words shattered her. He was not a burden. He was her world. And she would burn her own soul to ash to save him. The building was a silent monolith of steel and smoked glass. Nestled in the city's most unobtrusively expensive district, Elara felt like a ghost as she approached, her simple dress and worn coat a stark contrast to the polished marble and discreet luxury around her. The invitation Sasha had procured felt like a lead weight in her purse. Inside, she was met by a woman who seemed carved from ice and diamonds. Madame Evangeline had sharp, assessing eyes that missed nothing and a smile that didn't reach them. You're younger than our usual candidates, she observed, her voice a smooth, cool murmur, as she led Elara through a suite of rooms that smelled of money and old perfume. clearly new to this arena. Are you certain you understand the nature of this engagement? I need the money, Ilara said, her voice surprisingly steady. My father is dying. Madame Evangeline's gaze softened by a fraction of a degree. I see. Well, you are certainly compelling. Your innocence may prove to be your greatest asset tonight. Some of our clients value authenticity above all else. The preparation room was a hive of silent, efficient activity. Women in various states of undress were being tended to by a small army of stylists. Ilara was placed in a chair, a canvas for experts. She watched in the mirror as her face was transformed, her usual freckles concealed, her eyes made larger and more mysterious. Her dark hair, usually in a messy bun, was smoothed into a cascade of sleek waves. The other women moved with a practiced ease, chatting about previous events, comparing notes on clients. They were beautiful, polished, and utterly detached. First time? A woman with fiery red hair and a knowing smile asked from the next chair. Laura nodded, unable to speak. Don't look so petrified, darling. Most of them are perfectly civilized. Just lonely old men with more money than sense. Smile, be charming, and you'll be fine. The dress they gave her was a slip of liquid silver, backless and held up by little more than hope. It clung to her in a way that felt both alien and powerful. Staring at her reflection, Ilara didn't see herself. She saw a beautiful stranger, a valuable object ready for display. The ballroom took her breath away, though not in a good way. It was too much. It's too much crystal. It's too much gold leaf. Too much murmured conversation that felt like a marketplace. The men were all variations on a theme. Expensive suits, carefully maintained hair, eyes that held a calculating coldness. She felt their gazes like physical touches as she entered, appraising, evaluating. She was a cut of meat, a vintage of wine. Madame Evangeline took the stage, her voice a hypnotic instrument. She explained the rules with a velvet glove over an iron fist. Companionship, conversation, discretion. The words were a thin veneer over a much uglier truth. One by one, women were presented. The bids were called out like stock prices each, one higher than the last. Ilara watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, a trapped bird trying to escape its cage. This was really happening. And now, a rare and exquisite new addition to our collection, Madame Evangeline purred. Please welcome Ilara. Legs, made of water and fear, carried her up the steps. The spotlight was blindingly hot. She could feel every pair of eyes dissecting her. Ilara brings a fresh perspective, an untouched quality that is increasingly rare, Madame Evangeline said, her hand a firm, possessive weight on Ilara's arm. The subtext was clear, and the room responded. A low hum of interest rippled through the crowd. 100,000, a voice from the front. 150, to her left. 2. From the right. The numbers climbed, making her dizzy. It was more money than she had ever conceptualized. It was salvation. 300,000. A new voice, calm and bored, a hush fell. It was a staggering sum. Ilara squinted into the lights, trying to see then. From the deepest shadows at the back of the room, a voice cut through the silence. It was low, quiet, but it carried an absolute, unquestionable authority that froze the room solid. 500,000. A collective intake of breath. Madame Evangeline's grip tightened. We have 500,000. Do I hear 550? The silence was profound, heavy with shock and speculation. 500,000. Going once. The pause was agony. Going twice, Ilara's heart stopped. Sold. The gavel fell with a sound like a bone breaking. It was done. Her old life was over. As Madame Evangeline guided her off the stage, Ilara risked a glance toward the dark corner where her mysterious benefactor sat. She could see nothing but a vague, tall silhouette, but she could feel his gaze on her, intense and unwavering. In a few moments, she would meet the man who had just purchased a piece of her life for the price of her father's. Her hands trembled, but beneath the terror, a terrible, traitorous curiosity sparked. What kind of man paid such? A price for a stranger, and what did he truly want? Madame Evangeline's grip on her arm was firm, guiding her through a labyrinth of hushed corridors away from the murmuring opulence of the ballroom. The silver dress, which had felt like armor under the spotlight, now felt flimsy and revealing. A costume for a play she never auditioned for. Each step was heavy, the weight of the number 500,000, a physical pressure on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She had sold a piece of her soul, and now she was being delivered. To its new owner, they stopped before a door of dark, polished wood. Madame Evangeline gave her a look that was neither kind nor cruel, merely professional.
I remember.
Discretion is the foundation of everything here. His reputation, and now yours, depends on it. She opened the door without knocking, and gently pushed Ilara inside. Your companion, sir? The door clicked shut behind her, the sound final, like a lock engaging. The room was a study in understated power. Unlike the gilded ballroom, this space was decorated in deep burgundies and dark woods, intimate and quiet. A fire crackled in a marble fireplace, casting dancing shadows. The air smelled of old books and fine whiskey. And in the center of it, all, standing by the fireplace with his back to her, was the silhouette from the shadows. He turned. He was not what she had expected, not the lecherous older man she had braced herself for. He was tall, lean, with the athletic build of a runner. His hair was dark, thick, and swept back from a strong brow, with just the first hints of silver at the temples. He might have been in his late 30s, but it was his face that held her captive. It was all sharp, intelligent angles of blade, of a nose, a firm jaw, a mouth that seemed accustomed to sternness, and his eyes. They were a startling, pale gray, the color of a winter sky just before snow. They regarded her with an unnerving intensity, taking in every detail of her from her carefully styled hair to the slight tremor in her hands. But there was no hunger in his gaze, only assessment. Something else, something she couldn't name. A profound, weary loneliness. You look terrified. His voice was the same as in the auction, a low, calm baritone that vibrated through the quiet room. It wasn't an accusation, merely an observation. Ilara forced her chin up, clutching her small beaded purse like a shield. It's my first auction. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. I gathered. He gestured to a pair of deep leather armchairs near the fire. Please, sit. Would you care for a drink? Wine? Something stronger? You look like you could use it. Water is fine, she managed, her throat dry. She moved to the chair, her legs feeling unsteady. She perched on the edge, her back straight. He moved to a sideboard where a crystal pitcher of water and glasses sat. His movements were economical, precise, utterly controlled. He poured a glass and brought it to her. As he handed it to her, their fingers brushed. A jolt, sharp and unexpected, passed through her at the contact. She flinched slightly, and his gray eyes flicked up to meet hers, noting her reaction. He didn't comment. He took the chair opposite her, leaning back and steepling his fingers. He studied her for a long, silent moment. The only sound was the pop and crackle of the fire. You're wondering why I paid such an exorbitant amount for a single evening? He stated. The thought had crossed my mind, she said, her voice gaining a little strength. What is? Did you expect from me, Mr. Thorne? Julian Thorne? He paused as if weighing his words. And my expectations have just changed. A cold dread washed over her. Changed how? Madame Evangeline's file on you was. Thorough, your name is Ilara Vance. You're 24. An artist. Your father has dilated cardiomyopathy. His prognosis is poor without a specific experimental treatment his insurance denies. Duh. You work at a second-hand store and live in a apartment you can't afford. Have no romantic history to speak of. You've never been with a man. Each fact was a small violation, laid bare in his calm, even tone. She felt exposed, flayed open. Heat rushed to her cheeks. You paid for a dossier? I pay for information. It's how I avoid unpleasant surprises. His gaze was unwavering. The most pertinent piece of information is your innocence. It makes you a liability for a single evening. Her heart hammered. Liability, emotions, attachments. Complications I have no interest in navigating for one night. Leaned forward slightly, the firelight carving shadows into his face. So I'm proposing a different arrangement. Ilara could only stare, her mind reeling. I am offering you a contract, he said, his voice businesslike now. 6 months, you will live in my residence. You will act as my companion at social and business functions. You will be present. You will be charming. You will be a buffer between me and the world that constantly wants a piece of my time, my money, my energy. In return, I will not only pay for your father's complete treatment, every procedure, every medication, the best specialists in the world, but I will also deposit a sum of money into a trust for you that will ensure your financial security for life. Regardless of what happens after the 6 months, the words were so monumental, so impossible, they simply didn't compute. It was a fairy tale. It's a terrifying, bewildering fairy tale. You? You want me to live with you for 6 months? Yes. In exchange, you expect nothing. The question was a whisper. I expect what I just outlined. Companionship, conversation, a public presence. You'll have your own private suite. Your time will be your own when I do not require you. Your body's not part of this contract. He said it with such finality, such a lack of carnal interest, that she almost believed him. Why? The word burst out of her. What? Why would you do this? You could hire a professional, an actress, for a fraction of the cost. For the first time, his controlled mask slipped. A flicker of something raw and painful crossed his features before it was ruthlessly suppressed. He looked into the fire. Professional actresses are still acting. They see a wallet. Everyone does. I find the company of those who are paid to tolerate me to be draining. He looked back at her, his gray eyes capturing hers. You, however, will be there for a reason I can understand, a reason I can respect. You're not greedy, you're desperate. Desperation makes for a certain authenticity. I am purchasing authenticity, Ilara, for 6 months. The logic was insane, but she could see the twisted sense in it. This was a man so isolated by his wealth, so wounded by those who saw only his money, that he was willing to pay a fortune for someone who would be real with him. Even if that reality was born of a financial transaction, I need to think, she said, her voice trembling. Of course, he said, though his tone suggested time was a luxury she didn't have. But you should be aware. The hospital has scheduled a consultation for a new treatment protocol for your father tomorrow morning. They will not proceed without a significant deposit. The amount I bid tonight would cover it. The amount I am offering now would cure him. The reminder was a knife to the heart. He wasn't just offering her a choice. He was highlighting the abyss that was her only alternative. If I agree, she asked, her throat tight, what happens tonight? Tonight. I take you home. You pack what you need. You explain to your father that you've received a generous grant for an artist's residency that requires you to live on site for 6 months. It's a fiction, but a kinder one than the truth. My driver will take you to his appointment tomorrow. After that, you will be brought to my home, and our arrangement will begin. Home. He called it his home, not a penthouse, not an estate. The word sounded strange in his mouth. She looked at him, this Julian Thorne. This lonely, complicated man who saw her not as a woman, but as a solution to his isolation. He was offering her a gilded cage, but it was a cage that would save her father's life. There were no other options. There was no other hope. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the air tasting of expensive whiskey and impending fate. She met his winter-gray eyes. All right, she whispered, the words feeling like they came from someone else. I accept. Faint nod. No smile, no triumph. Just acceptance. Good. My car is downstairs. The ride to her apartment was made in silence. He sat across from her in the spacious, silent luxury of the town car, staring out the window at the passing city. Lights. She clutched her small bag containing her old clothes. The silver dress, feeling more alien by the minute, he walked her to her building's dilapidated entrance. The contrast between his impeccable, tailored coat and the peeling paint and graffiti was almost comical. "I will send a car for you at 10 tomorrow," he said, his voice quiet in the empty street. He handed her a plain white business card. On it was only a phone number, engraved. "If you need anything before then." She took it, their fingers brushing again. This time she didn't flinch. She felt numb. "Thank you," she said, the words hollow. "Don't," he said, his voice suddenly sharp. Then it softened. "This isn't kindness, Alara. It's a transaction. Remember that." He turned and walked back to the car without a backward glance. She stood on the cracked pavement, watching the sleek black vehicle disappear into the night. The card with the single phone number held tightly in her hand. She had just sold 6 months of her life to a stranger. She had crossed the line. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, to her sleeping, sick father, she knew nothing would ever be the same again. The car that collected her the next day was the same silent, luxurious vessel from the night before. The driver, a man named Henrik, with a face that gave nothing away, loaded her single worn suitcase into the trunk with the same care he might afford a crate of vintage champagne. The ride was a blur of navigating her father's tearful, its bewildered joy at her artist's residency, a fiction that tasted like ash in her mouth, and the terrifying finality of watching his hospital, the one that had been a place of dread, become a place of hope, all thanks to a single phone call from Julian Thorne's office. When the car slid into a private underground garage beneath one of the city's most iconic towers, Yalara's numbness began to curdle into a low humming. Anxiety. The private elevator that whooshed them skyward was lined with brushed bronze and moved with a silence that felt unnatural. It opened not into a hallway, but directly into his home. The word home felt entirely inadequate. It was a realm. The entire top floor was a single, breathtaking expanse of glass and minimalist design. The city sprawled beneath them like a glittering circuit board, so far below that the sounds of life were completely erased. Everything was sharp angles, polished concrete, and vast stretches of empty space. It was stunning, technologically perfect, and utterly sterile. There were no photographs, no personal mementos, no clutter. It felt less like a place where someone lived and more like a museum exhibit titled "The Life of a Billionaire." "Your suite is through here," Julian's voice came from behind her. He'd changed into dark trousers and a simple black sweater that made his gray eyes seem even more piercing. He moved through the vast space with a familiar ease that highlighted her own clumsiness. He led her to a doorway that opened into a space almost as large as her entire apartment. It was beautifully appointed a sitting area with a plush sofa, a bedroom with a vast bed, a bathroom with a marble tub big enough to swim in. A wall of windows offered a dizzying view. On the bed lay a few simple, elegant outfits. In the closet, more hung waiting, all in her size. "How did you?" she began, running a hand over the soft cashmere of a sweater. "I told you," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I pay for information. The stylist will come tomorrow to ensure you have everything you need for any event. Henrik is your driver. His number is programmed into the phone on the bedside table. Use it for anything." He gestured to a small, sleek card on the dresser. "This is a credit card. There is no limit. Use it for anything you want." The casual way he mentioned unlimited funds, the sheer scale of it all, made her head spin. "Julian, what is all this? What do you actually do?" "I solve problems," he said, his tone neutral. "Logistical problems, mostly. Supply chain. AI. Corporate security architecture. I build systems that make other systems more efficient. And this," she asked, gesturing to the impossible apartment around them. "Is this efficient?" For a fraction of a second, his mask slipped, and she saw a flash of something amusement. "Irony. It's a fortress," he replied simply. "It keeps things out." He didn't specify what those things were. "Rest, I'll have dinner sent to your room. We'll have our first event tomorrow evening." The first few weeks fell into a strange, surreal rhythm. Her days were her own. She painted in the light-filled silence of her suite. She visited her father. His color was already improving. She wandered the vast, empty apartment like a ghost. Julian was a shadow in his own home, leaving before dawn, returning long after. Dark. Their interactions were limited to the events she accompanied him to. At these functions, he was a different man. Not warm, but impeccably charming, his arm a firm, impersonal guide at the small of her back. He navigated the crowds of wealthy, hungry people with a detached skill that was fascinating to watch. He deflected personal questions, steered conversations to business, and used her presence as a shield against the most persistent socialites. She learned to play her part, to smile and nod, to offer bland pleasantries. She became good at it. Too good she began to read him. She saw the minute tightening of his jaw when a certain venture capitalist mentioned a new partnership. She noticed how his smile became a fraction too sharp when a society matron asked, for the dozenth time, why a man like him was still unmarried. She saw the way his eyes would sometimes go distant, looking at the crowds but not seeing them, retreating into some private walled-off place inside himself. The change began on a Thursday. A storm had rolled in from the sea, lashing the floor-to-ceiling windows with rain. Turning the city lights below into smears of color, Julian came home unusually early. His perfect composure was frayed. His hair was damp from the rain, his sweater sleeves pushed up to his elbows. There was a tension in his shoulders she hadn't seen before. She had sent the live-in chef home, was craving the normalcy of cooking for herself. The simple, familiar scent of garlic and rosemary filled the air. A stark contrast to the usual sterile silence. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the smell, looked softer around the edges. "Human, that smells incredible," he said, his voice lacking its usual polished edge. He leaned against the frame, watching her stir the pasta. "I didn't know you cooked. It's the only thing my dad taught me that stuck," she said, surprised by his presence. "I hope you don't mind. I sent the chef home." "Not at all." He ventured further into the kitchen, a space that seemed surprised to have a minute. "I haven't smelled anything like that in here. Ever. Rough day?" she asked, emboldened by his unusual demeanor. He let out a short, humorless breath. "I lost a significant contract today. A client I've had for a decade. Someone I considered reliable." "What happened?" His gray eyes met hers, and for the first time, he didn't seem to be filtering his thoughts. "My former business partner undercut the bid. He had inside information. Seems his relationship with my ex-fiancée is still proving to be professionally advantageous for them." The admission was stark and unvarnished. It was the first real piece of himself. He had offered. Genevieve Elara said quietly, the name she'd heard whispered at parties like a curse. His gaze sharpened. "You know about her? People talk. I listen. She hurt you." Wasn't a question. He looked away toward the storm outside. "She didn't just hurt me. She was a surgical strike. She and Mark, my partner, they were together for months before I found out. They'd been planning their own company, using my secrets, my contacts. I found out the day after I'd bought the ring." He turned back, his expression raw. "I lost the woman I thought I loved, my best friend, and nearly my company, all in a 24-hour period." The pain in his voice was a living thing in the room. Lara felt an ache for him, this man who had built an impenetrable fortress, because someone had once bombed his home. "That's when you built all this," she said softly, gesturing around them. "The walls? Walls keep you safe," he stated, his old defensiveness returning for a moment. "They also keep you lonely," she replied, turning off the stove. He was quiet for a long moment, just looking at her. The only sound was the rain hitting the glass. "Is that an observation or a diagnosis?" he asked, but the bite was gone from his tone. She took a step closer into his space. She could smell the rain on his skin, see the faint, tired lines around his eyes. "It's the observation of someone who's been building her own walls for a long time. I recognize the architecture." He didn't retreat. His eyes searched hers, and the air between them grew thick, charged with something new and dangerous. This was no longer a transaction. This was a connection, frayed and electric. His gaze dropped to her mouth, and Alara's breath hitched in her throat. The space between them diminished by an inch, drawn by an invisible force. The shrill ring of his phone was like a gunshot in the quiet kitchen. He jerked back as if burned. The moment shattered. His mask slammed back into place, colder and harder than before. He answered the phone, his voice all business, and walked out of the kitchen without a backward glance. But the crack remained. Ilara stood alone in the suddenly cavernous kitchen, the scent of rosemary and garlic now smelling like a missed chance. Her heart was pounding. She'd agreed to a business arrangement, a simple, clean exchange. But somewhere between the sterile penthouse and the raw pain in Julian's eyes, her feelings had become hopelessly, terrifyingly complicated. She was falling for her captor, her benefactor, the lonely, wounded man behind the billionaire's mask. And as she lay awake that night listening to the storm rage against the glass, she knew the walls she'd meant to keep around her own heart were crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The crack in the facade, once opened, refused to be sealed. The days that followed the stormy night in the kitchen were charged with a new, unspoken tension. Julian was no longer just a shadow in his own home. He was a presence she was hyper-aware of. A book left on a table, the low murmur of his voice on a business call from his study, the faint scent of his cologne lingering in a room he'd just left. These small traces of him were like landmarks. On a map she was desperately trying to redraw. Their interactions were the same, yet entirely different. The polite distance was still there, but it now felt like a thin sheet of ice over a deep, rushing current. When his hand guided her at events, the touch felt less perfunctory, more intentional. When he looked at her across a crowded room, his gray eyes held a question they hadn't before. He was watching her, studying her reactions, as if she were a complex piece of code he was trying to decrypt. The annual street, Jude Children's Hospital. Gala was the pinnacle of the social calendar, and Julian's attendance was non-negotiable. His donations were among the largest, his name on the wing that housed the pediatric cardiology unit. The cause, she had learned from a rare, offhand comment, was deeply personal. A cousin, much younger, had spent the last years of her short life in a place just like it. The knowledge added a new layer to his relentless, almost grim determination in his philanthropy. It wasn't just about tax write-offs. It was about fighting a battle he had already lost once. Ilara's gown for the evening was a deep, midnight blue velvet that seemed to drink the light. It was conservative by the standards of their usual events. High-necked and long-sleeved, but it clung to her every curve, making her feel both regal and intensely vulnerable. Julian, in his tailored tuxedo, was devastatingly handsome, a study in monochrome severity. But as they entered the glittering ballroom, Ilara saw the subtle signs of his armor locking into place, the slight stiffening of his spine. The way his smile became a practiced, neutral line. "It's a necessary evil," he murmured to her, his hand a warm, firm pressure on the small of her back. "These people write checks that keep the lights on. You don't have to pretend with me," she said softly. Surprising herself, he looked down at her, his gray eyes flickering with something unreadable. "No," he agreed, his voice low. "I don't." They moved through the crowd, a perfectly coordinated unit. He introduced her simply as Ilara, and the way he said her name, without qualification or explanation, felt more intimate than any possessive label. She played her part, smiling and making conversation. But her attention was constantly pulled back to him, to the way he navigated the shark-infested waters with a tired, cynical expertise. Then the atmosphere shifted. A ripple went through the crowd near the entrance, a subtle turning of heads. Ilara felt the change in Julian first as sudden, absolute rigidity in the arm she held. His entire body went still, his expression hardening into a mask of cold stone. She followed his gaze. Genevieve Croft had arrived. She was exactly as Ilara had pictured her. From the whispered descriptions, a vision of icy blonde perfection. Her gown was a slash of brilliant white silk, daring and expensive. An innate, predatory confidence, a queen returning to a court she still considered hers. Her smile was brilliant and utterly empty as she kissed acquaintances. Her eyes constantly scanning, assessing La felt a primal knot of dread tighten in her stomach. Julian's hand on her back was now less a guide and more an anchor, holding them both steady. It was inevitable. Genevieve's predatory gaze found them, and a sharper, more calculating smile touched her blood-red lips. She glided through the crowd toward their table, shark-scenting blood in the water. "Julian," she purred, her voice like honey in shattered glass. "You look well. Prosperity agrees with you." Her eyes swept over him with a possessive familiarity that made Ilara's skin crawl. "Genevieve," he replied, his voice a flat, neutral tone she'd never heard him use before. It was the sound of absolute zero. Genevieve's attention, lazy and dismissive, shifted to Ilara. "And who is this lovely creature? She's new." Her gaze raked over Ilara's dress, her face, her simple updo, missing nothing and approving of less. "Another one of your temporary companions? You do go through them?" "She's prettier than the last one. I'll give you that. Fresher." The words were delivered with a velvet-trapped cruelty meant to demean them both. Lara felt the heat of humiliation flood her cheeks, opened her mouth, but no sound came. Out utterly paralyzed by the venomous precision of the attack. She never got the chance to speak. Julian moved so fast it was a blur. He was on his feet, his body positioned slightly in front of Ilara as a shield. The air around him seemed to crackle with a cold, controlled fury. "This," he said, his voice low but cutting through the surrounding chatter like a blade, "is Ilara." He invested her name with a weight, a respect that made Genevieve's smile falter. "And she possesses more authenticity, grace, and genuine kindness than anyone you will ever have the privilege of meeting. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're needed elsewhere." He didn't wait for a response. He turned, his expression fierce and unreadable, and offered Ilara his arm. A stunned silence had fallen at their table and several nearby. Taking his arm, her legs trembling, she let him lead her away, feeling Genevieve shocked. Furious gaze burning into her back. He didn't stop until they reached the relative privacy of the dance floor. Without a word, he pulled her into his arms, one hand settling firmly on her back, the other clasping her hand. The orchestra was playing something slow and sweeping. They began to move. It wasn't the practiced, performative dancing of other events. It was something else entirely. His lead was sure, his body a solid, warm wall against the shock still coursing through her. They fit together perfectly, her head naturally finding a place near his shoulder, their movements syncing as if they'd done this 1,000 times. "Thank you," she whispered into the rough wool of his tuxedo jacket, her voice shaky. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "I did." What she said was unforgivable. But it was true in a way, she murmured, the words painful to say. "I am temporary. That's what our contract says." He slowed their movement, his hand tightening on hers. He leaned back just enough to look down into her face, his gray eyes searching hers with an intensity that stole her breath. "Is that all you think you are to me?" he asked, the question raw and stripped bare of all his usual defenses. The world, the music, the glittering crowd, Genevieve's poison, all of it faded into a distant hum. There was only his face, his eyes, the feel of his hand on her back. "I don't know what I am to you." "Julian," she breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You've never told me?" He pulled her closer, until their bodies were almost flush. She could feel the steady, strong beat of his heart. "You're the first person in 5 years who's made me forget to constantly guard every word, every expression," he said, his voice rough with an emotion she dared not name. "You're the first woman who's made me want to tear my damn walls down instead of building them higher." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "Julian, I know this complicates everything," he pressed on, his gaze locked on hers, refusing to let her look away. "I know it's not what we agreed. But I'm falling for you, Ilara. I've been falling since the moment I saw you on that stage, trying so hard to be brave." The confession hung between them, terrifying and beautiful. The ice had not just cracked, it had shattered, and the current beneath was pulling them both under. "This changes everything," she whispered, her own feelings so carefully guarded, rising up to meet his. "It doesn't have to," he said, though his eyes begged to differ. "We can still honor the original terms. But I needed you to know. For me, this stopped being just business a long time ago." She looked up at him, at the vulnerability warring with the fear in his wintry eyes. She saw the man, not the billionaire. The lonely, wounded man who had chosen her, not for her lack of history, but for the truth he saw in her. What if I said it stopped being just business for me too? The words were out before she could stop them, a surrender and a leap of faith all at once. What if I said that somewhere between your sterile penthouse and all these terrible parties, I started falling for you too? I tried not to, because I know how this story is supposed to end, but Julian stopped dancing entirely. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks right there in the middle of the crowded ballroom. His eyes were wide, full of a hope so fragile it made her heart ache. "It doesn't have to end," he said, his voice barely audible over the music. "We can write a new contract. We can build something real." "What about the walls?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What about all the reasons you built them? Isabella is the past," he said, his thumb tracing her jawline. He paused, searching for the words. "You are the future I didn't know I could still want." The drive back to the penthouse was a silence louder than any sound. The space inside the town car was thick with the unspoken, with the seismic shift that had just appended the carefully constructed world of their contract. Julian held her hand, his grip firm, almost desperate, as if she might vanish if he let go. His thumb traced slow, absent circles on her skin, a silent echo of the confession on the dance floor. Ilara could only stare out at the blur of city lights, her mind reeling. The words "I'm falling for you" played on a loop, each time sending a new, delicious shiver through her. The fortress had not just been breached. The gate had been thrown open from the inside. The private elevator seemed to climb slower than ever, the hum of its mechanism, the only sound between them. When the doors slid open into the vast, dark expanse of the penthouse, the usual sterile silence felt different, charged, anticipatory. Julian didn't turn on the main lights. City glow from the wall of windows provided a dim, romantic illumination. He led her not to her suite, but to the terrace doors. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp. The sky above the light-polluted city, a deep, velvety black pricked with a few stubborn stars. They stood at the railing. The cool metal under her palms, a grounding force. The world sprawled beneath them, but it felt distant, unimportant. "I need you to be sure," he said, his voice rough in the quiet night. He wasn't looking at her, but out at the endless grid of lights. "If we cross this line, if we make this real, there's no going back to the way things were. The simplicity of the transaction, it's gone. It'll be messy, complicated. I come with baggage." Ilara turned to face him, her heart a wild, hopeful drum in her chest. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was dwarfed by something stronger, something that felt terrifyingly like destiny. "I don't want to go back," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I want whatever complicated, messy thing this is with you. My life has never been simple, Julian. I'm not afraid of complicated." He finally turned to look at her, his gray eyes searching hers in the dim light. The vulnerability she saw there undid her completely. This powerful, controlled man was handing her his heart, and he was terrified. "I love you," he said, the words simple, stark, and utterly devastating in their honesty. "I love your resilience. I love the way you see beauty in things everyone else overlooks. I love that you looked at my fortress and saw a prison. You made me want to find the key." Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of a profound, overwhelming relief. She reached up, her fingers gently tracing the tense line of his jaw. "I love you," she whispered back, the truth of it settling into her bones. "I love your mind. I love the man you are when you forget to be careful. I love the protective, ferocious heart you try so hard to hide." When he kissed her, it was nothing like she could have imagined. It wasn't the claiming of a purchaser, nor the practiced move of a wealthy playboy. It was a surrender, a question, an answer. It was 5 years of loneliness and guarded hope poured into a single, breathtaking connection. His lips were soft, yet demanding, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against the solid strength of his body until not a sliver of light could pass between them. It was a kiss that tasted of second chances and a future she had never dared to paint. The 6. Months that followed were a journey of dismantling walls and building new foundations. The penthouse slowly began to feel like a home. One of her paintings, a vibrant, abstract piece full of hope and light, peered on the living room wall, a defiant splash of color against the gray. The chef learned to make her father's favorite soup. Their relationship was tested, of course. Julian's deep-seated trust issues flared when a business associate made a pointed comment about the help. Ilara's own insecurities surfaced during a society event where she felt like an imposter in a world of old money. At each time they chose to talk, to be painfully, awkwardly honest. They learned to argue without cruelty and to apologize without reservation. Contract was forgotten, replaced by a daily, conscious choice to be together. The true test came not from outside, but from within, a call in the dead of night. Her father had been rushed to the hospital. A post-treatment infection, the doctor said. Serious, critical. The world narrowed to the sterile white of a hospital corridor. Ilara crumbled. The strong facade she'd built for her father shattering into a million pieces. Was Julian who became the rock, not with his money, but with his presence. He never left her side. He spoke to doctors in a calm, commanding voice that made them listen. He held her when she cried, his silence more comforting than any words. He arranged for a specialist from another country to consult via satellite, not because he threw money at the problem, but because he used his brilliant logistical mind to solve it, sitting in the waiting room, her head on his shoulder. His arm a steady weight around her, Ilara understood. This was the man he was beneath the billionaire. This was the partner she had chosen. Her father pulled through. The crisis passed, leaving behind a deeper, unshakable bond between the three of them. Mr. Vance, his health steadily improving, looked at Julian not as a benefactor, but with a fond, paternal warmth that made Julian, for the first time in Ilara's memory, seem almost shy. On the anniversary of the night they met, Julian took her to dinner, not at a Michelin-starred restaurant, but to a small, family-owned Italian place that reminded her of the meals she'd cooked for him. Over candlelight and a simple, perfect plate of pasta, he slid a small velvet box across the table. Inside wasn't a ring. It was a key. "It's for your new studio," he said, his eyes shining with a pride that was all for her. "The space I told you about down on Late Street, the lease is in your name. The first year's rent is paid from the trust we set up your money, Ilara. Your art paid for it." She was speechless, tears of joy streaming down her face. Was the most thoughtful, empowering gift anyone had ever given her. He got down on one knee right there beside the table, drawing gasps and smiles from the other diners. He took her hand. "The key is for your career. This," he said, producing a simple, breathtaking diamond ring from his pocket, "is for my heart. Marry me, Ilara. Not because of a contract, but because I can't imagine a single day of the rest of my life without you in it. Let me be your partner." In everything, the answer was yes. Was always going to be yes. Now, standing in the main gallery of Studio Vance, surrounded by the vibrant, bold work of artists she had chosen to champion, Ilara felt a sense of completion so profound it was like a physical warmth. The opening night had been a roaring success. Her father, healthy and beaming, was showing off a small sculpture to a group of friends. The future was a blank canvas, dazzling in its possibility. Julian's arms slid around her waist from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as he looked out at the crowd with her. "Happy." He murmured into her ear, his voice full of a love that still made her heart skip. Incredibly, she sighed, leaning back into his solid strength. "Thank you for all of this. You've built this," he corrected her, his lips brushing her temple. "I just provided the spotlight." He turned her in his arms, his gaze serious for a moment. He reached into his pocket and pulled out another key, this one old and sturdy, tied with a simple red ribbon. "I have one more thing for you." She took it, a question in her eyes. "It's for the house next door to your father's. I bought it. I thought maybe you'd like to be closer to him. I'd like the chance to really get to know the man who raised the most extraordinary woman I've ever met." She stared at the key, then up at his face, so full of love and quiet hope. This man, this beautiful, complicated, endlessly surprising man, She threw her arms around his neck, laughing through her tears. "You continue to amaze me, Julian Thorne." "Good," he said, his smile finally reaching those stormy gray eyes, lighting them from within. "I plan to spend the rest of my life amazing you, Alara Thorne." "Thorne?" she asked, raising an eyebrow, her heart soaring. "Well," he grinned, a boyish, unguarded expression she cherished. "That's assuming you say yes to making it official. Will you? Will you build a real, messy, complicated, wonderful life? With me? Standing in her own gallery, surrounded by the art that was her soul and the man who was her heart." The answer was the easiest thing in the world. Yes. The kiss they shared was not an ending, but a brilliant, beautiful beginning. The auction had been the first stroke on the canvas, a desperate splash of darkness. But the painting they had created together, stroke by careful, trusting stroke, was a masterpiece of light.